Greetings to all of you. My heart is certainly here today, and I find it quite heartwarming that all of you make time every Tuesday to get together to do something good and to be happy and positive. And that kind of commitment shows me how energetic such a group is and how lucky Chennai is to have this group as well as other groups. I see another event. So, Mr. President, with your kind permission, I will start briefly, touch upon history just a little bit to give you an idea of, because the being in London didn't happen without what went before. So, in typical Indian fashion, if I were to say, where was the Pulayar Shuli? That started from my grandmother. Her name was Sharada. Apparently I overlapped with her for a year, so I don't actually remember her. But she seems to have given me the name Pushkala. And she also seems to have made a few quite emotional remarks about, please don't have the baby in London. அது ஏதாவது நம்மள மாதிரியே இருக்காது, அது வேற மாதிரி இருக்கும், அதுக்கு ஏதாவது ஆயிடும், அது அப்புறம் சீமையிலேயே இருக்கணும்னு சொல்லும். இதெல்லாம் obviously she had a vision of all that even before I happened. Nevertheless, starting from there, because my father was in the army, I was actually left in Chennai from perhaps the tender age of 2 or 3. Appa, can you clarify, was I 2 or was I 3 when you left me in Chennai?
Now 50 years long.
So I was here, care of my aunt. And I don't think anybody here is old enough to remember her. Her name is Sushila Achutraman. She's now almost touching 90. She was a very well-known Harikatha exponent. But also, she was probably better known because she was one of the earliest women drivers in Chennai, excuse the pun, manning a huge DeSoto. So that the car and its lady driver were very well known on Chennai streets. And of course, I had the happy opportunity to ride in the said car many times and go to many kacheris and many events. So I think the early orientation in terms of having an interest, and then also knowing that the more you are at performances and things, the more enjoyable life is. So I was raised on that brand of philosophy. And we moved on to Hyderabad, where my father was posted. And that again was a very privileged city to be in at that time. You could hear Shammagudi Srinivasa here from 6 to 9 in the evening and move on and hear a recital by Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Saab from 9 to whenever, usually 2:33. And in Hyderabad, late meals, late nights, everything. The more you indulge in all these things, the more cosmopolitan and happier you get. So that was one part of it. The other side was the school I went to was called Vidyaranya and had been founded by a dynamic lady called Shanta Rameshwar Rao, prolific writer who was deeply influenced by J. Krishnamurti. So at assembly, she, just as occasionally we'd have a Christmas carol or a hymn or something, equally you would hear the chants of Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham chanted by all of us. And to this day from that school, I carry close relationships with a Parsi girl, and in fact we have this expression, best friend. My best friend is a lady called Zehra Sherwani, who was always, as she said, a very staunch Musalman. And I was an unknowing Hindu. And the only time I realized what influence Vidyaranya must have had on her was when a few years ago, her son was in some difficulty. And she said to me, this Pandit here says I should drop some silver serpents into the Jamuna river. Is there anything else I should do? So my immediate reaction was, you're not supposed to have anything to do with idols and things like this. She said, see, I don't believe in it anyway, but if somebody believes in it and I can put it into the water and it's going to help my son, should I not do this? So I said, wow, wow. And more recently, when I went to Dakshineshwar in Kolkata and I saw that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa himself, when I went into the room in which he used to pray, read that he had familiarized himself with the Bible, familiarized himself with the Quran, and then he became a staunch Hindu. I actually feel that institutes which promote a happy harmony amongst people, where the love between the people comes first and the separations come later, it definitely makes you think in a different sense. So eventually when I landed in London, one of the things that I really liked about life there is that there is at least a policy or a wish to treat everybody equally and freely, and then see what comes out of that. But when you have specific questions for me later, I mean, I might have some incidents to tell you which you can then form your own view. But generally, it does appear that even though it's a monarchy, it is much more of an egalitarian society there. And that's something that I really enjoyed when I went there the first time. This school of mine was also a great influence on me in another way. And I remember an incident when our principal, she decided to start a current affairs class when I was about 14 years old. That's how old I was when the current affairs class started. The idea was that each child, we were only 9 of us in the class, so we were a privileged bunch. Each of us would go away and bring a piece of news from current affairs, and then it would be discussed. Now, she was also our English teacher, so every time she made people discuss things, she would pounce on you for what she saw as, not correct expression in grammar, or if you used the same vocabulary again and again, or you said, or if you said, I mean, she would pounce on you for these sorts of things. So it wasn't particularly enjoyable. It was always on a Monday afternoon, which is the worst time you can have. After the weekend, Monday afternoon is the time you really feel like going off and sleeping or whatever. But anyway, I forgot to mention that in the school she'd also found an Australian to teach us English and an English person to teach us English, and she also taught us English. So amongst all these various different waves and influences, obviously, it wasn't just one kind of English. And one Monday afternoon, I think 3-4 weeks into this, none of us came with the news item that we could discuss. So of course she was very annoyed. I'm sure Monday afternoons were hard for her also. She was really, really cross, and she started shouting at the class as a whole and saying, I'm going to tell the chowkidar to let you all outside the locked gates, and you can stay there until you know the value of time. Because she was the principal of the school, and she'd actually made time to interact with us and figured out that this was what was missing in the curriculum, and this was the best thing to do. Silence everywhere. Now, my mother was actually a teacher of a younger class in the same school, and there were a couple of other people in the class who had parents as teachers. So the ignominy of what would happen, we were the top class in the school was growing with us, of what would happen if we were all sent out of school like that. All these teachers would mumble. I mean, when you have a very dynamic head, you don't have cohorts, you only have underlings. So, they would all babble even a little more. And just to, ears were going red, we were getting hot and bothered. And she said, if nobody has got anything to say, you can start marching out, sort of thing. And I put my hand up. And she said, yes. So she barked, yes, actually. And so I said, we used to call her Shantatamma. So I said, Shantatamma, why didn't anybody read the paper? I said, I didn't read the paper because every time you read the paper, those days we had the Telangana agitation, said somebody has burnt a bus, and somebody has killed somebody, and somebody has stolen something from somebody. And I really don't like to read the paper. I prefer to sit and practice my music. And total deafening silence in the class. My classmates were all looking at me with horror, censure, name the expression, and there were 8 of them there, 8 different expressions. And I started quaking, and this lady paced up and down the room. I mean, we all must have thought that she's going to devise some other punishment. She comes around, and she sits down, and she says, I am so grateful. So we thought, more sarcasm, more... and then she says, I I'm so grateful that one diminutive little person had the courage to speak the truth to me. I was the shortest and the smallest in the class. And then the next thing she said was, you can now have Mondays off to go and do, interact with Mr. Sangameshwar. He was the music teacher. And you can have Mondays off, you don't need to do current affairs. Now, one way, I think that changed the way I thought about life. Because anytime I've been in doubt, I've heard her voice saying, I was so proud that you spoke the truth, or the equivalent of it. So I've always been able to take risks where others would think I'm a sheer fool in that sense. And I'll tell you about one little thing that I did later, which I thought friends, or rather even my children, tell me it was a huge risk that I took, and we don't know if it's going to, what it's going to result in. But anyway, so that was important. Incidentally, my other classmates wanted to come and do music, but she just said that you didn't have the courage to speak up for yourself, so off you go. So that was the shape of that school. We went on to Delhi, and where I read mathematics. My dance training started in Hyderabad, but not as soon as we went to Hyderabad, because my parents were connoisseurs themselves, and they didn't pass the early teachers who were there as being of a worthy standard. So I started dance about 2 years before I left Hyderabad. Carried on in Delhi. My first guru, the lady who did my Arangetram, was Malati Srinivasan. Very wise, very nice lady. And she took me through the preliminary stages, but she used to live in Chennai and we lived in Hyderabad. So my training was always peripatetic. I had to come and learn here and go back and practice with a tape recorder. So I did what was unusually my whole set of items, and then ran them day in and day out, rehearsing for about 6 months, and then came back and did the Arangetram on one Vijayadashmi here in 1969. The experience taught me to figure out a lot of things for myself. I mean, I think other gurus will probably say that's terrible, that's no way to learn an art form, and what a commercial way, staying somewhere, guru somewhere else, you come, you do this. But I had the advantage of my mother being a day in, day out critic, sitting right there and being a perfect nuisance sometimes. But I think her sense of trying to do things perfectly must be something that, really helped me. Because later on, when I had to face other panels at interviews and things, I used to walk through them. And a lot of those questions raised had been raised by my mother years previously. So I think, although I did things like this, it was because I had the background at home. Then come Delhi, we had the Bangladesh war at that time. So I was not a very good mathematics student at all, because the hours I had to spend to keep up, to keep ahead with the class were far too many, and they took me away from any artistic experience. Also, in Delhi, you used to have seasonal events of music and dance. So invariably, I found myself on the Grand Trunk Express, often standing, because when you buy a ticket in the last moment and then you jump in and come to Chennai. But at that time, I got used sometimes to jumping onto a train by myself, just because I wanted to come to Music Academy all the way from Delhi. And so it must have brought up another side of mine, which is just single-minded about doing something that eventually had its own rewards. It was always Chennai that was the attraction. And I think, I'm sure some Chennaites are aware of how this decoction of daily culture, as they have their decoction of pure, wonderful South Indian coffee, how this seeps into the system, and everybody in Chennai, I think, forms a much more discerning member of audience, and gives both the performer and themselves a much higher level of cultural exchange. I would think in Europe you probably find this in places like Vienna or in maybe London. I shouldn't take London for granted. Nevertheless, it's a very select kind of appreciation that you get here, and therefore standards are definitely much, much higher, and it's always like aspiring to the mecca of Bharatanatyam. And so the center, the epicenter was here, and I kept doing different things. At one point of time, I was very restricted in what I was doing, because by then I had got the Government of India scholarship. At that stage, the scholarship, although it was a meager 300 rupees a month, it was very important for me, because by then I was already married, and I wouldn't have had the clout to go off and join a guru for 2 years with that domestic situation if I hadn't got the scholarship. So it gave me the attention of the Dhananjayans 2 years continuously, both of them, because I was their first scholarship student. So a set of circumstances that were very much to my advantage. And from there I found that I was restricted in my teaching, because all the time we were teaching mythological material to youngsters who hadn't connected with the mythology in the same way. And so when I was in Delhi, I started trying to develop a curriculum that was secular, that was not really connected to the gods. And one of the reasons for that was I also had editor Khushwant Singh's granddaughter in my class. His wife used to come every day. And whenever we had to do things like Rama, Sita, she would just look away and, pat her hands like this. And then when you did something and said, oh, this can be done in any culture, she would brighten up and look at it. So, influences like this, especially when you sit in Delhi, it's quite important to make you search inwards. And at that point, there was another lady who influenced me a great deal. Her name is Vibha Parthasarthi. She was at Sardar Patel School. And she told me, I'll give you 2 classes every day. I'll tell them that they don't need to do sports. You see what you can do with them. And so I did that for about almost 3 years. And every time I got convinced that there was something more to that Bharatanatyam could, and I'm sure a lot of others have thought this before me, so I don't think it's, I think when we all go through the search, there are points where you feel you're at crossroads or there's a stumbling block or you have to do something about it. And in my case, that something turned out to be the British Council Fellowship, which took me to London, gave me access to a centre called Trent Park, which is beautiful. And for the first time, I had this whole world opened up to me, where my professor was willing to take every project from the point that if I had a question, he enabled me to convert it into a project and go off and work on it. At the end of my 10 months at Middlesex University, I had a whole lot of ideas for the use of Bharatanatyam in the general curriculum, this, that and the other. And at that time, before me, there had been a lady called Tara Rajkumar who had done a certain amount of work with the bureaucrats, the funders, and then her husband got a job in Australia, so she moved on. So I think she had done a lot of foundation work. So when I was there, a lot of doors suddenly, with a bit of effort, opened up. And a whole range of work was created in the field of education, and because some of the barriers were that Indian dance is religious, Indian dance is culture specific. Whereas if you look at the reality, they have found out now through the study of dance science that the human learns things using 7 or 8 different techniques. And Indian dance uses all those techniques, classical Indian dance. So that if somebody actually does Indian dance, they use their whole brain. It calls upon it. I mean, certain dance styles are not logical, certain dance styles are not introspective, certain dance styles are only spatial. If you consider all those qualities, Indian dance styles actually use the whole brain, and it's a huge legacy that we have here. And if you were to ask me what is the objective of interacting with all of you today, where some of you may be interested in dance, some of you may be interested in London, and some of you may be here just because it's happening, I would say that if I can influence society to start thinking of having some form of dance in the curriculum, or like the Gujaratis having dance at all celebrations, there is, I think, society on the whole will vastly benefit. In the early years, because I got some, all people in the UK who want to do artistic projects are generally asked to state what they want to do. And you get funding either at the level of your district, which is called a borough, or you get funding at the Arts Council level. Now, I was quite fortunate to get a good team of people to work with and get some funding at the Arts Council level. So for about 10 years, I toured nationally. And at that time, some of the things I did were pieces like Beauty and the Beast, The Taming of the Shrew. Once I'd done that for a couple of years, I started doing Indian mythology with English titles to bring in new audiences. In some cases, or some aspects of dance, it might be old wine in new bottles. But sometimes, very often, the collaborations would throw up the whole area of work where the Taming of the Shrew, which we started to do originally based on Shakespeare, ended up becoming a rebellion between the woman and the man, because her father was just bringing her to the marriage market and selling her off to the highest bidder. And then from that point onwards, the journey between the man and the woman, negotiating their relationship and getting to a point where they're able to be not one in control and the other out of control, but where they're able to live in harmony. So some kind of a theme would develop, which is beyond the dance, and that would be taken as workshops to various schools ahead of the performance launch. Now, I think this was during the golden days of Britain when there was enough funding. And at that time, a dance company like ours used to be able to charge a fee of £6,000 per week. And if we did that, if we took it, say, £48,000 over 8 weeks, the government would put another maybe £40,000 towards its creation. And that's the nature of the project that used to happen. Of course, you have to submit a marketing budget. Your administrator would cost you about £18,000 to work on it. That would be the administrator's fee for getting the bookings and getting it off. Properly professional, everything audited. And the only snag was that to make an application for a project, you had to make an application in November. You would know by February of the following year whether you were successful or not. Then you have to launch the project as soon as possible. And then I found after a few years that while we were still touring one project, you had to dream up the next one. And at that point, the spirit started to rebel, my spirit. I just said, I can't be forced. And we tried to talk to them to see, can you give us less money? Just give us the first 18,000 for the administrator, and we can devise the project, get the bookings, all of that, and then we'll come back and talk to you about how much funding we need and how much we can raise from fees. But their systems didn't let them operate like that. So the last project I remember getting, we asked for funding of £90,000, by then we'd grown to a big company. We got 45, and we were told you should be very grateful. We've only funded 3 companies out of about 18 that applied. One was a special needs company with people with challenges. Another was black, and you are the Asian company. So at that point I just thought, okay, they're ticking boxes, let's not play this game anymore. So I said, please give this money to the special needs company, let them do a good project. And at that point, one was able to sort of step off. Now with anybody in Indian dance, you know that we're all taught to be choreographing, doing this, that, and all the others. So I was able to move into the teaching line quite easily. And most of the people who come to me are of Indian origin, but from various parts of the world. So English people do learn Bharatanatyam or Kathak. They tend to do it in little bits. For instance, if somebody is doing a degree in dance at the University of Surrey, they might do 2 years of Kathak just to be able to do one module with a Kathak leaning. So that kind of interest is there. There are, but all the companies which tour Indian dance, there are quite a few of them, and brilliant ones. One of the world's best known choreographers now is a girl called Shobhana Jaisingh, lady called Shobhana Jaisingh, who started off being a solo dancer under Valur Chavraj. She's now known the world over, and I think her recordings have gone to all different universities for students to analyze and study for criticism and the analysis of dance. So that's been one part of. I wanted to tell you a little thing about Britain. If you're a dancer or a performing artist, you pay very high interest for you pay very high rates of insurance for cars. If you're a teacher, you pay very low because you're considered very stable in society. So all these different hats that I wore as a choreographer or a consultant a lot of names we find ourselves, people like me in the UK who are freelancing, we tend to give ourselves different ones. For instance, if I'm trying to go to a new country that I've never been to before, I call myself an artistic director because it sounds better, doesn't it? So, Britain has allowed a person like me who started with no connections there. When I went on the British Council scholarship, one of the things was that the council itself was closed on a Saturday and Sunday. And within a few weeks of reaching London, I had gone to the shopping centre I was at Selfridges, one of the stores. Somebody pushed into the changing room as I was trying on something. I just said, "Excuse me," and then turned away. Next time when I looked back, my bag had gone. So the person had taken this with my passport, the keys of where I was staying, not a penny, and no phone numbers. So then, and it was a Friday evening. So I just, for a while I was at a loss. I went to the police station. They gave me a cup of tea and they said, "We can let you make a phone call or we can let you make 2 phone calls. But after that, somebody has to come and get you." So I thought perhaps the Indian High Commission, but that went on to an answering machine system. I couldn't get there. Then somebody told me there is an office of the Indian High Commission somewhere here. If you walk along this marble arch, there is an office somewhere there. So I went there, and it had the office of HAL and something else in those days, in number 8 Audley Street. It's where the Nehru Center lives now. And there was one Sardarji gentleman who had stayed on late to finish some typing or something. So when I told him my story, he said, "Very bad place, beta. Why you came to this wretched country? Here, 5 pounds, beta. Take and go." Now he'd come from Africa somewhere and then found employment there. But that 5 pounds was great. It was great at that point of time. It really. So there are moments when you can feel completely vulnerable, and but somewhere someone comes along. Now, have I exhausted the time that I had?
Yes. 10 more minutes. 10 minutes.
Okay. So, going on from there, at one point of time, a lot of people started to teach Bharatanatyam. Places like the Bhavan Center, I worked with them briefly for the first year that I was there. And after that, I worked as artistic director of a place called Academy. 2 years into that, I decided to become a freelance artist. So, for the first 10 years, I used to have work in London for 3 months and come home to India for 3 months. And every time I did this, the next project would be planted and designed by itself. So at that time, I didn't have an administrator, but as a freelancer, somehow things fell into place just like that by themselves. And over the years, I've been able to change cars maybe twice, thrice and pay for the car. I haven't been able to pay for the house. I still keep paying only the interest. And that's where it is. I mean, with some people who might have more than one person in the house working in the dance. Because by the time my daughter came to work in the dance, she had her own family. But I've now got slightly clever. I live with my daughter. So the economics of it are that you have to take a lot of risks, because there was one time when in the middle of a tour, our trailer, which had been disabled and left on the side so that the musicians could be taken to sightsee and see the Tower of London. By the time the technician came back with them, the trailer had gone. And we were in the middle of the tour. So we had to run around, beg, borrow something, and make do with a couple of performances. At the end of the tour, we saw that somebody from one of the venues where we had done those in-between performances till we could rebuild the wardrobe and rebuild the instrument cover. They said, we were led to understand that the following instrument, that there would be an instrument like an oboe. He meant the nadaswaram. We had one in the company, but we couldn't raise it quickly enough when it was stolen. There should have been something like an oboe, and there should have been some very specially designed costumes. Perhaps my eye is not trained to see the difference between a new costume and a traditional costume, the report writer had written. And another report writer, this one had written, It was a wonderful tour, except that the male dancer had a very strange crab-like position of the feet. Now that is, you train for years to put your feet in the Kathakali style. And the report writer had said that that was the one thing that they couldn't understand. Anyway, this is in the 80s. But now we have lots of students taking exams. And primarily we have to thank the Sri Lankan immigrant community for this, because they are hot about giving diplomas for anything done. If it was possible to give out diplomas from class 2 or 3 or 4, they would do that, because that's the culture in the island. And for many years they've had these awards. But in Britain, you have a qualification and curriculum authority which controls awards very, very tightly. So if a student of ballet has done 4 grades of Bharatanatyam and you compare them, you compare these two, they should have achieved similar goals. The length of performance they're able to do, the number of hours they spend in a week, the health and safety for all of these. Health and safety is a very important part of the British experience. As a dance teacher, if I do something which injures the student, I can be told by the court that I can never teach again. As a dance teacher, I have to have public liability insurance if I'm taking a private class. If I'm running an event, I have to cover the theatre. Some theatres cover it themselves, but for some you have to cover the theatre for fire hazards and things like that. If you're working with children, for every under the age of 8, for every 4 children you need an adult. Under the age of 4 or something, for every 2 children you need an adult. And all of us have to be cleared by the Criminal Records Bureau, which this certificate is valid only for 2 years. The finicky people only take it for 2 years at a time. Others will let you hold it for 3 years at a time. That checks you out to see that you have no record of behavior that's not appropriate. Of that, if you're caught drunk whilst driving, you cannot handle children. And your insurance really goes up a lot. So there are all these sorts of things in place to let an individual teacher protect themselves and protect the people who they're serving. So there are many things like this. The committee has managed about 10, 11 years ago to get a syllabus sorted out. I wrote the initial syllabus, and then of course the group, we all work on it. Like your group meets, we don't meet so frequently, but every year we have to go through training and monitoring to see that we've kept up with the developments in sports science. So it just continues, refreshing your training constantly is a requirement in British terms. So that's another thing that's very exciting about being a member of the profession there. And I was reading this, something about building goodwill and better friendship, being fair to all concerned, beneficial to all concerned. I think those are all things that all professionals, I mean, even when we are interviewing somebody for a post, the way the advertisements are framed, it has to give equal opportunities to everybody. The way the interview is conducted, you have to ask all candidates the same question. Now, a wise person here might say, what if their skills are different? Then from the beginning of the interview, you plant one question for the person to talk about their skills, individual skills. And then other interviewers can ask them questions arising from that. So there are very, very fine guidelines for conduct, very fine guidelines for the dispersal of public money, and definitely an intention to make sure that nobody is disadvantaged. Now, of course, what's happened since the EEC is that large parcels of people arrive from East Europe, and the homes that are targeted a lot by the East Europeans, because a lot of them are in the building trade. And a lot of us want to cut corners by not paying the proper wage of the proper qualified and certified white worker, because they all have unions and they charge us for their rates. The East European people will come in and definitely undercut them. There have been instances of, on the days of Arangetrams, of at least 4 families I know, They could have been Indian, but as it happens, they were Sri Lankan. And on the day of the Arangetram, their homes were burgled and everything taken out. And likewise, 2 or 3 Indian weddings within days of the wedding, because the wedding usually happens on a Saturday or a Sunday. So on a Monday or a Tuesday, when either the family is sleeping or they've gone to the temple or something, groups have come and cleaned things out, and basically from the fingerprints, the police have identified that it is Romanians, or if I'm being videoed, I may please that this part may be please edited. Because as a teacher, I shouldn't be saying anything that distinguishes between one group and another. But this is what has happened to general life. So most Asians are beginning to replace all their gold jewelry with either artificial ones or they get in trouble. And there was a spell when East Ham in London had its first Sharavana Bhavan in London, and it's like being near the Koil here in Mylapore. Women were beginning to have their nose rings snatched off, and that was by bunches of young Sri Lankan lads who had been shipped to Britain for them to be improved, and all they'd seen in their lives was violence, and they wanted quick money, and there's a spate of this, and when things like this happen, the police find it very difficult to take immediate action because they feel that they will be criticized for not treating the minorities properly. So the British fall over themselves to be fair, and sometimes it can take a while before things are restored and justice is done. But apart from that, I mean, having spent so many years in Britain, and having given a lot of India to Britain, I think I'm now looking forward to years of being here, partly because my parents are here and need to spend some time with them, but also partly because I haven't been able to pay my mortgage, so I'm going to come home. And what I'm really looking forward to in terms of life here is to see whether something can be done to regulate pedestrian pathways and roads and traffic, because everything is so unsafe for the driver, for everybody else. I think we're getting such a great name outside in terms of people's brains here. It would be wonderful if we could change something to make people safer. And with that, one last thing I would say is I often got asked, "Pussycat, pussycat, where have you been?" I've been to London to look at the Queen. You must all know this. When I was in class 6 in Hyderabad in grammar school, the teacher one day was casually asking people, "Where were you born?" When she asked, I said, "In Chelmsford." She said, "Where's that?" And I said, "That's just near London." And I got a tight slap across my face. The next teacher was stepping into the class, and she said, "Why did you hit her?" So this teacher says, "I'm an army officer's wife, she's an army officer's daughter, and she's telling lies like this that she went to London, little show of one more." So, years later, when I actually got to London the first time, in fact, that was the first time I climbed on a plane at the age of 28. Until then, when I landed in Heathrow, they told me, "You are a British citizen, why are you coming through this channel?" And till then, I didn't even know. So the becoming British, I think, was not becoming British as much as having a personality that was both here and there. Because if somebody asks me, what will I miss if I have to leave London and come back? It's my committee work, my voluntary work, and my ability to drive peacefully at any time of day or night as a woman on the street. I mean, that may be more in my imagination than in reality, but those are the things I will miss the most. But I think there are lots of lovely things here which are not there, which I should look forward to in the next phase. But to go back to the nursery rhyme, when you say "Pussycat, pussycat, what did you there?" my fervent hope is that I've done a little more than looking under the chair. Thank you.